Have you ever read a story that just felt backwards? Well, tucked away in the book of Genesis, there are two really famous accounts, a giant family tree and the Tower of Babel. And they form this amazing literary puzzle. So today, let's solve it.
The entire mystery really boils down to this one question. We get the result, humanity scattered all over the world speaking different languages, before we get the story that explains why it all happened. It's like reading the final chapter of a mystery novel first, and you gotta believe this was done on purpose.
All right, so let's dive right into this confusing arrangement. The way these chapters are put together is completely intentional, and it's the absolute key to unlocking the author's whole message.
So check out this sequence. In Genesis 10, we get this huge list, what's called the Table of Nations, already scattered and speaking different languages. But then Genesis 11 starts and, wait a minute, the whole world is in one place speaking the same language. See? The effect is shown before the cause, which forces us to stop and ask, hey, what's going on here?
To make any sense of this, we have to do what the author is nudging us to do. We're going to ignore the chapter break for a second and jump straight to the cause of all this chaos, the legendary story of the Tower of Babel.
The story kicks off with a major display of human technology. You see, building with baked brick and using tar for mortar, that was high-tech stuff in ancient Mesopotamia. They weren't just building something, they were showing off what they could achieve.
And their goal was, well, ambitious to say the least. They wanted to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. Now, this was probably modeled on the huge temple towers they had back then, called ziggurats. But this wasn't just a skyscraper. It was a monument to their own greatness, an attempt to bridge the gap between earth and heaven, all by themselves.
And this right here is the crucial point, their motivation. They say it out loud, so that we may make a name for ourselves. This is all about collective human pride. Plus, they wanted to stay together in one place, which was in direct defiance of God's earlier command to humanity to be fruitful and fill the earth.
And I just love this. The author uses this brilliant piece of literary irony to kind of poke fun at them. They're so proud of this massive tower, reaching for the sky. But from God's perspective, it's so tiny and insignificant that the text says he has to come down just to get a good look at it. It's such a powerful way to show the gap between human pride and divine reality. And this illustrates the outcome perfectly. The name of the city, Babel, is actually a wordplay. In Hebrew, it sounds just like the word balal, which means to confuse. So the city's name literally means confusion. And what's interesting is that God's judgment isn't total destruction. It's actually a kind of grace, scattering them through different languages to save them from their own self-destructive pride.
Okay, so now that we get the why from Genesis 11, we can finally go back to Genesis 10 and see it for what it really is. It's basically a map of the world after the fallout from Babel.
Genesis 10 lists exactly 70 nations. Now, in the ancient world, numbers had symbolic meaning, and 70, as a multiple of 7, almost always represented completeness or wholeness. So this isn't just a random number. It's a symbolic way of saying this list represents all of humanity, now scattered according to God's plan.
And for the ancient Israelites reading this chapter was way more than a geography lesson. It was a moral map. It explained the origins of all their neighbors, and even their enemies, all framed by the blessings and curses that Noah had given his sons. It showed how God's command to fill the earth was being fulfilled, even if it happened because of human rebellion.
But that still leaves one more little piece of the puzzle. If Genesis 10 already listed all the families, including the descendants of Shem, why does Genesis 11 turn around and repeat his family line all over again?
Well, the author is using two different kinds of genealogies. Think of it like a camera lens. The list in Genesis 10 is the wide-angle lens. It gives you this big branching picture of all humanity spreading out. But the list at the end of Genesis 11, that's the zoom lens. It zeroes in and follows one single direct line from Shem all the way down to a man named Abraham.
And this is where the whole thing just clicks into place. All of this setup creates this amazing narrative arc that actually stretches across the entire Bible, starting with this ancient story of scattering and pointing to a future moment of incredible gathering.
You see, the scattering at Babel, which was born from human pride trying to build its way up to heaven, finds its perfect reversal in the New Testament story of Pentecost. At Pentecost, heaven comes down to humanity. And instead of languages being confused to scatter people, languages are miraculously understood to bring people together into a new kind of community.
And what's so cool is the list of nations who were there at Pentecost. You've got Medes, Elamites from Mesopotamia, Egyptians, Romans, Arabs, Many of these are the direct descendants of the very people groups listed way back in Genesis 10. It's this beautiful, deliberate connection that ties the whole narrative together.
So ultimately, by arranging these stories out of order, the author of Genesis delivered a powerful message about two types of unity. One is built on human ambition, and it only leads to confusion. But there's another kind of unity possible, one that doesn't erase our diverse cultures and languages, but actually transcends them through understanding. And that leaves us with a pretty important question to think about. What kind of foundations are we building on today?